Part 1. Rachel O'Reilly, The Life of Promise and Her Relationship with Joe O'Reilly. Rachel O'Reilly, born Rachel O'Reilly in 1974, began her life in uncertain circumstances but was enveloped in love and care. Adopted by Rose and Jim O'Reilly, a couple unable to have their own children, in the northern outskirts of County Dublin, Ireland, Rachel grew up in a household brimming with affection alongside four other adopted siblings. Each child in the O'Reilly family carried their unique story, but they all shared one thing: unconditional love and care. From an early age, Rachel displayed a dynamic and goal-oriented personality. She excelled academically and participated actively in extracurricular activities, especially softball. Rachel was not just an outstanding athlete, but also a dedicated team player, always ready to assist and support her peers. She quickly became a star on the field, setting local records and becoming a source of pride for the O'Reilly family. The relationship between Rachel and her adoptive mother, Rose, was particularly special. Rose was not just a mother, but also a confidant and advisor to Rachel throughout her life. They shared everything from the smallest joys to the most significant life decisions. This bond continued to be strong even as Rachel transitioned into adulthood, married, and had children of her own. After graduating high school, Rachel decided to pursue a career in marketing. She enrolled in a local university and simultaneously took a part-time job at a department store. This job was not just a means to earn extra income, but also an opportunity for Rachel to develop her communication and time management skills. She quickly impressed colleagues and customers alike with her enthusiasm and professionalism. It was at this department store that Rachel's life took a significant turn when she met Joe O'Reilly. Joe, born in 1972, was also a native of County Dublin. He grew up in a modest family where he was taught that success in life must be achieved through one's own effort and hard work. Joe was tall, athletic, and shared a passion for softball, a common interest that would play a crucial role in his relationship with Rachel. When Rachel and Joe met, Joe was immediately captivated by her appearance and personality. He persistently pursued her, despite her initial lack of interest. Joe constantly gifted presents, complimented Rachel, and even read her favorite book to have common topics for conversation. Eventually, their shared interest in softball brought them closer. Joe joined Rachel in a game, impressing her with his skills and leading the team to victory. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and Joe went to great lengths to demonstrate his commitment. He organized a surprise trip to Paris, the city of romance, where he proposed to Rachel atop the Eiffel Tower. Overwhelmed by the gesture, Rachel agreed to marry him, believing she had found her fairy tale prince. A few years later, the couple married and had 2 sons. They moved to the quiet and picturesque Scottish province of Null, where they bought a spacious and cozy home, ideal for raising their children. After the birth of their eldest son, Rachel left her job to become a full-time homemaker, dedicating herself to the care of her husband and child. When their second son was born, Rachel was fully immersed in motherhood, while Joe became the family's primary breadwinner, working in an advertising agency as an outdoor advertising specialist. Those who knew Joe personally described him as confident, ambitious, and charming. At work, he was seen as a responsible and qualified specialist, always punctual and attentive. He was often the first to arrive at the office and stayed late when needed. Joe also maintained his active lifestyle, frequently visiting the gym and having several exercise machines at home. As time passed, Joe's presence at home became increasingly infrequent. He justified his absence with work commitments and an eagerly anticipated promotion. Rachel supported him as best she could, but their relationship began to deteriorate, and the family dynamics changed significantly. In the summer of 2004, an unsettling event occurred. An anonymous letter was sent to Child Protective Services, alleging that Rachel was a negligent mother who mistreated her sons, then aged 4 and 2. A special commission visited the O'Reilly home in response to the alarming report. Despite finding nothing suspicious and receiving glowing descriptions of Mrs. O'Reilly as a loving and caring mother from relatives and neighbors, the letter cast a shadow over her reputation. This incident marked the beginning of a series of events that would unravel the seemingly idyllic life of Rachel O'Reilly, leading to a tragic and shocking conclusion. The community, unaware of the undercurrents in the O'Reilly household, would soon be shaken by the events that unfolded in the quiet province of Null. As the summer of 2004 waned, the O'Reilly household, once a symbol of familial bliss, began to show cracks beneath its surface. Rachel, once the vibrant and active woman, found herself increasingly isolated in her role as a homemaker, while Joe's absences grew longer and more frequent. The once close-knit family was slowly drifting apart, a change that did not go unnoticed by those closest to them. The anonymous letter to Child Protective Services was a significant blow to Rachel. She had devoted her life to being a loving mother and wife, and the baseless accusations shook her deeply. Despite the support from her family and the community, who rallied around her, the incident left a lingering sense of unease. Meanwhile, Joe's behavior became increasingly erratic. Colleagues at his advertising agency noticed subtle changes in his demeanor. He was still the hardworking and ambitious employee, but there was a newfound restlessness about him. He often seemed preoccupied, and his once frequent social interactions at work diminished. This change coincided with his growing absences from home, which he continued to attribute to work pressures. The distance between Rachel and Joe grew, both emotionally and physically. Conversations became infrequent and strained, filled more with necessities than with the warmth and love that once defined their relationship. The couple, who had once been inseparable, were now living almost parallel lives under the same roof. In the midst of this growing estrangement, a shocking event occurred on the morning of October 4, 2004, an event that would forever alter the course of the O'Reilly family and send ripples of horror throughout Ireland. That fateful morning began like any other. Joe left the house early for work, while Rachel and their sons remained asleep. Throughout the day, Joe made several attempts to contact Rachel via text and phone calls, but received no response. Concerned, he called their home phone, leaving a message on the answering machine, his voice shaky with worry, asking Rachel to call him back as soon as possible. In the afternoon, an unexpected call from the kindergarten teacher alerted Joe to something amiss. Rachel had not arrived to pick up their sons, an unprecedented occurrence. Panicked, Joe called his mother-in-law, Rose, to check if she knew Rachel's whereabouts. When Rose expressed ignorance, Joe asked her to go to their house to see if everything was all right. He then hurried to the kindergarten to pick up the children himself. Rose's arrival at the O'Reilly home was met with an eerie silence. Rachel's car was in the driveway, indicating her presence. However, the house was dark, and no one responded to Rose's calls. The first sign of something amiss was the disarray inside the house. It looked as though someone had rummaged through their belongings. Drawers and cabinets were open, their contents strewn across the floor. The scene resembled a burglary, but something felt deeply wrong. Rose's heart sank as she entered the bedroom. There, in a scene of unimaginable horror, lay Rachel, motionless on the floor, surrounded by a pool of her own blood. The room was a testament to a brutal and violent struggle. Blood was splattered on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling. Rachel's injuries were severe. Her skull was visible through her blood-matted hair. In a state of shock, Rose reached out to her daughter, only to find her cold and lifeless. Rachel had been dead for hours. Overcome with grief and horror, Rose screamed for help and called the police. Neighbors, including a doctor, rushed to the scene. The doctor was the first to examine Rachel's body, confirming the worst fears. Rachel O'Reilly was beyond help. When Joe arrived at the scene, he was met with a crowd of neighbors and the flashing lights of police vehicles. His reaction to the news of his wife's death was one of hysteria. He ran into the house, screaming and crying, vowing to avenge Rachel's death. To the police officers present, it was a display of profound grief, but it would later become a subject of scrutiny. The crime scene was one of the most brutal the local police had ever encountered. The murder weapon, believed to be a heavy, blunt object, was used with such ferocity that little remained unscathed on Rachel's body. It appeared she had been attacked from behind, with no opportunity to defend herself. Initially, the scene suggested a robbery gone wrong. However, certain details didn't add up. Valuables were left untouched, and the disarray seemed almost staged. Part 2, The Unraveling of Joe O'Reilly, the investigation deepens. As the investigation into Rachel O'Reilly's brutal murder intensified, the focus increasingly turned towards her husband, Joe O'Reilly. The man who had publicly displayed profound grief was now under a microscope, and the facade he had carefully constructed began to crumble. Joe's alibi and inconsistencies. Joe O'Reilly maintained that he was at work at the time of Rachel's murder, an alibi that initially seemed solid. He claimed to have been at a bus depot on the other side of town, overseeing the placement of advertisements, a statement corroborated by a colleague. However, upon closer examination, cracks began to appear in his story. Investigators scrutinized Joe's movements on the day of the murder. They confirmed his presence at the gym early in the morning through surveillance footage. This seemed to align with his routine and provided him with an initial alibi. However, the timeline following his gym visit raised questions. Colleagues at Joe's workplace noted his unusual behavior on the day of the murder. He appeared distracted and anxious, a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. His claim of being at the bus depot was also brought into question. The colleague who had vouched for his presence there later admitted to confirming Joe's story without concrete evidence, merely taking his word for it. The digital trail and secret affairs. The investigation took a significant turn when detectives examined Joe's computer at his workplace. They discovered a trove of emails, some of which Joe had attempted to delete. These emails revealed a side of Joe that was unknown to many. Joe's correspondence was often with his friend and his own sister, where he frequently expressed disdain for Rachel. He used derogatory language to describe her and expressed feelings of disgust and resentment. This was a stark contrast to the loving husband image he had portrayed in public. More damning was the discovery of emails between Joe and a colleague, Nikki Pelly. It became evident that Joe and Nikki were engaged in an extramarital affair. The emails painted a picture of a relationship that was not only romantic but also deeply entangled. Joe had promised Nikki a future together, a future that included his sons from his marriage with Rachel. Nikki Pelly's testimony. Nikki Pelly, when questioned by the police, confirmed the affair with Joe. She revealed that their relationship was serious and ongoing, contradicting Joe's claim that it had ended. Nikki's testimony was a critical blow to Joe's character and his alibi. It suggested a motive for the murder, the desire to start a new life with his mistress without the complications of a divorce. The anonymous letter and social services investigation. The investigation also shed light on the anonymous letter sent to Child Protective Services, accusing Rachel of being an unfit mother. This letter had caused significant distress to Rachel and her family. In a shocking revelation, it was discovered that the letter was orchestrated by Joe himself. He had convinced his mother to write and send the letter, aiming to tarnish Rachel's reputation as a mother. This act was seen as a calculated move by Joe to gain an upper hand in what might have been a forthcoming custody battle should they have divorced. It painted a picture of a man willing to go to great lengths to control the narrative of his family life. Physical evidence and crime scene analysis. While the murder weapon was never found, the crime scene offered valuable insights. Forensic experts analyzed the blood spatter patterns and the nature of Rachel's injuries. The brutality of the attack indicated extreme rage or personal vendetta. The lack of defensive wounds on Rachel suggested that she was taken by surprise, likely attacked from behind. The disarray in the house, initially thought to be the result of a robbery, was now seen in a different light. The untouched valuables and the specific items reported missing by Joe raised suspicions. It appeared more like a staged scene to mislead the investigation. Joe's behavior post-murder. In the weeks following Rachel's murder, Joe's behavior became increasingly erratic and attention-seeking. He engaged with the media frequently, giving tours of his house and the crime scene. His eagerness to be in the spotlight was unusual for a grieving husband and raised eyebrows. During the filming of a television program about the murder, Joe's demeanor was notably different from that of Rachel's grieving family. He was seen interacting casually with the crew, showing more interest in his appearance on camera than in the memory of his wife. Conclusion of Part 2. As the investigation delved deeper, the image of Joe O'Reilly as a grieving husband began to erode, revealing a man who was manipulative, unfaithful, and potentially violent. The evidence was mounting, and the police were closing in on what they believed was the truth behind Rachel O'Reilly's tragic death. The community, once sympathetic towards Joe, began to view him with suspicion and disbelief. The case was about to take a significant turn as investigators moved towards making a decisive move. Part 3: The Arrest and Trial of Joe O'Reilly. As the investigation into Rachel O'Reilly's murder progressed, the evidence against her husband, Joe O'Reilly, began to mount. The man who had once elicited sympathy was now at the center of a sinister narrative, one that painted him as a cold and calculating murderer. The arrest of Joe O'Reilly. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators managed to piece together Joe's movements on the day of the murder. Despite his claims of being at work, cell phone records contradicted his story. The signal from Joe's phone placed him at or near the family home at the time when Rachel was murdered. This was the pivotal evidence that led to his arrest. Joe's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The man who had appeared on television, appealing for justice for his wife, was now accused of her brutal murder. The media frenzy intensified, with the public and press scrutinizing every detail of the case. The trial and evidence presented. The trial of Joe O'Reilly was a highly publicized affair. The prosecution presented a compelling case, piecing together Joe's motive, opportunity, and the incriminating evidence that pointed to his guilt. 1. Motive. The prosecution argued that Joe's motive was rooted in his extramarital affair with Nikki Pelly. His desire to start a new life with his mistress, without the complications of a divorce and custody battle, was suggested as the driving force behind the murder. 2. Opportunity. Joe's meticulously planned alibi fell apart under scrutiny. Cell phone records placed him at the scene, and the timeline he provided did not match the evidence. His presence at the family home at the time of the murder was irrefutably established. 3. Behavioral evidence. Joe's behavior before and after the murder was heavily scrutinized. His affair, the anonymous letter to Child Protective Services, and his unusual demeanor following the murder painted a picture of a man capable of extreme deceit and manipulation. 4. Forensic evidence. Although the murder weapon was never found, forensic experts testified about the nature of Rachel's injuries and the blood spatter patterns at the crime scene. Their testimony suggested a personal and rage-filled attack, inconsistent with a random robbery gone wrong. Joe's defense and reaction. Joe O'Reilly's defense team attempted to counter the prosecution's narrative. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no concrete proof linking Joe to the murder. Joe maintained his innocence throughout the trial, portraying himself as a wronged husband, unjustly accused of a crime he did not commit. However, Joe's demeanor in court often worked against him. He was seen as unemotional and detached, showing little to no grief for his wife's brutal death. This lack of apparent empathy did not sit well with the jury or the public. The verdict and aftermath. After a trial that captivated the nation, Joe O'Reilly was found guilty of the murder of Rachel O'Reilly. The verdict was met with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, but sadness for the tragic and senseless loss of Rachel's life. Joe was sentenced to life imprisonment, a sentence that brought closure to Rachel's family but also highlighted the irreversible consequences of his actions. The case left an indelible mark on the community, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal relationships. Conclusion of Part 3. The trial and conviction of Joe O'Reilly closed a painful chapter in a case that had gripped the nation. It was a story of betrayal, jealousy, and murder that shattered the illusion of a happy family. Rachel O'Reilly's death remained a poignant reminder of the horrors of domestic violence, and her memory continued to evoke both sorrow and a call for greater awareness of such tragedies. Part 4. The Aftermath and Legacy of the Rachel O'Reilly Case. The conviction of Joe O'Reilly for the murder of his wife, Rachel O'Reilly, marked the end of a harrowing chapter for her family and the community. However, the aftermath of the case continued to resonate, raising important discussions about domestic violence, the psychology of killers, and the impact on the families involved. Life after the trial. 1. Rachel's family. For Rachel's family, the trial's conclusion brought a sense of justice, but it was also a reminder of their immense loss. They had to grapple with the reality that Rachel's killer was someone they had once trusted. The family focused on preserving Rachel's memory and raising awareness about domestic violence. 2. Joe O'Reilly in prison. In prison, Joe O'Reilly was reported to have adapted to his new life behind bars. He maintained his innocence, showing no remorse for his actions. His behavior in prison was described as exemplary, possibly in hopes of one day achieving parole. However, his lack of remorse and failure to accept responsibility for his actions made this a distant possibility. 3. Public reaction. The case had a profound impact on the public. It sparked discussions about the nature of domestic violence and the often hidden dangers within relationships. Rachel's story became a rallying point for advocates working to support victims of domestic abuse. Continued media interest. The media continued to show interest in the case, with numerous articles, documentaries, and books exploring various aspects of the tragedy. The fascination with the case was partly due to Joe's initial portrayal as a grieving husband and the shocking revelation of his guilt. Psychological analysis. Experts often analyzed Joe's behavior and psychology, trying to understand what drives a person to commit such a heinous act against a loved one. They discussed the signs of hidden aggression and the importance of recognizing early warning signs in relationships. Impact on legal and police procedures. The Rachel O'Reilly case also had implications for legal and police procedures in Ireland. It highlighted the importance of thorough investigation techniques, especially in cases where the perpetrator is close to the victim. The use of technology, such as cell phone tracking, played a crucial role in the case and underscored its value in modern policing. Legacy and awareness. 1. Raising awareness. Rachel's story became a powerful tool in raising awareness about domestic violence. Her family, friends, and various organizations used her story to educate the public about the signs of domestic abuse and the importance of seeking help. 2. Memorials and tributes. Memorials and tributes for Rachel were established, serving as a reminder of her life and the tragic circumstances of her death. These memorials also served as a beacon of hope and support for others experiencing domestic violence. 3. Policy changes. The case prompted discussions about policy changes, particularly in how domestic violence cases are handled and the support systems available for victims. Conclusion of Part 4. The Rachel O'Reilly case left an indelible mark on Irish society. It was a stark reminder of the complexities and dangers of domestic violence. The legacy of the case goes beyond the conviction of Joe O'Reilly. It lies in the ongoing conversations about relationship safety, the importance of support for victims, and the need for continuous improvement in the justice system. Rachel's memory lives on, not just as a victim of a brutal crime, but as a catalyst for change and a symbol of hope for those facing similar struggles.